Satya, Aetherflux Genius, debuted in the Creative Energy pre-constructed commander deck from Modern Horizons 3, and is a 3/5 human artificer with menace and haste for 1 in Jeskai colors. That's 1 blue, 1 red, and 1 white mana. Whenever Satya attacks, we create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of up to 1 other target's non-token creature we control. We get 2 energy counters. At the beginning of our end step, we sacrifice that token unless we pay an amount of energy counters equal to its mana value. Having menace and haste are great mechanics for a commander that wants to attack safely as soon as it enters the battlefield. Note the text on Satya. He creates up to 1 other target non-token creature we control. Even if we do not choose a target for his attack trigger, Satya still rewards us with 2 energy counters. This is noteworthy because if Satya enters the battlefield and is the only creature we control, then we can still send him into combat and reap the benefits of our general's energy-producing ability. Optimally, we want to target a creature with energy-producing abilities, most likely via an Enter the Battlefield trigger. Through this dynamic, we get the energy counters from the creature token copy entering the battlefield, and then we ponder the option of allowing this token to be sacrificed at the beginning of our end step, or keeping it in play by paying energy counters equal to its mana value. The more energy we can produce, the further we can advance our board state and resources, which is the goal and theme of this build. We want to create and use energy counters to out-resource and overwhelm our opponents on the path to imminent victory. We begin this deck tech by discussing the land base for this build. We are running 3 colors, and the overall costs of our spells are fairly balanced, which makes our job of cultivating a corresponding land base pretty easy. With that in mind, symmetry guides the construction of this land base, as we have 2 basic islands, 2 basic mountains, and 2 basic plains. For easy color fixing options, we have Command Tower, Rogran Triome, Spire of Industry, and Ether Hub. Command Tower is the best land in our format, and it taps to add a color from Satya's color identity. Rogran Triome provides 1 of any of our Jeskai colored mana, but it enters the battlefield tapped. We can fetch for this land due to it having 3 basic land types, and, if needed, we can pay 3 generic mana and cycle this card away to draw a card. Spire of Industry taps to add a colorless mana, or we can tap it and pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color, but we can only activate this ability if we control an artifact, which should not be a problem in this build. Lastly, we have Ether Hub. When it enters the battlefield, we get an energy counter. We can tap this land for a colorless mana, or we can tap it and pay an energy counter to add 1 mana of any color. Steam Vent, Sacred Foundry, and Hallowed Fountain are our shock lands. They are fetchable, enter the battlefield tapped unless we pay 2 life, and they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana. Training Center, Spectator Seating, and Sea of Clouds are our fan lands. They enter the battlefield tapped unless we have 2 or more opponents, and they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana. Storm-Carved Coast, Sundown Pass, and Deserted Beach are our slow lands. They enter the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or more other lands, and they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana. Shivan Reef, Battlefield Forge, and Adarkar Waste are our pain lands. They tap to add a colorless mana, or they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana and deal 1 damage to us. Cascade Bluffs, Rugged Prairie, and Mystic Gate are our filter lands. They tap to add a colorless mana, or we can pay 1 of 2 different colors of mana required by these lands' activation costs to produce any combination of 2 mana in those colors. We mentioned earlier in this section that some of our lands are fetchable. Scalding Tarn, Arid Mesa, and Flooded Strand are our fetch lands. We can tap these lands, pay 1 life, and sacrifice them to search our library for a land card with 1 of 2 different basic land types and put it onto the battlefield. Note that we are not required to search for only basic lands. We can also put Rogran Triome or our shock lands into play. Perilous Landscape is limited to searching for a basic island, basic mountain, or basic plains. However, we can tap this land to add a colorless mana, and, if needed, we could choose to pay Jeskai colors to cycle this card from our hand and draw a card. Up to this point, we have built a balanced land base that will allow us to cast all our spells free from mana screw. Now, let's showcase some utility options present in this deck. Hall of Heliod's Generosity and Academy Ruins are included for their recursion abilities. These lands tap to add a colorless mana, or we can pay 1 and a white mana to put target enchantment card from our graveyard on top of our library with the Hall, or we can pay 1 and 1 blue mana to do the same for target artifact card with Academy Ruins. We have 30 artifact and artifact creatures in this build, but only 6 enchantments. Although our number of soon-to-be showcased enchantments is small, their impact is not. Karn's Bastion taps to add a colorless mana, or we can pay 4 generic mana and tap it to proliferate. To proliferate, we choose any number of permanents and or players, and then give each of them another counter of each kind already there. Here we can proliferate our energy counters. Our primary path to victory is through combat, which makes Castle Embereth a fantastic addition. It enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a mountain, it taps to add a red mana, or we can pay 1 and 2 red mana and tap it to give creatures we control +1/+0 until end of turn. This temporary power boost could lead to game-ending combat. Helios 1 taps to add a colorless mana, or we can pay a generic mana and tap it to create an energy counter. We can also pay 3 generic mana, tap it, pay X energy counters, and sacrifice Helios 1 to destroy target non-land permanent with mana value X. We can only activate this ability as a sorcery. With this land, we can create energy counters, and if needed, we can use it to destroy an opponent's non-land permanent, but only as a sorcery, of course. Lastly, we have Maze of Ith, which we can tap to untap target attacking creature. All combat damage that will be dealt to and dealt by that creature is prevented this turn. Although this land is a defensive stalwart, we can utilize its ability to protect Satya from combat damage. Note that Satya's ability triggers whenever he attacks, and not when he deals combat damage. So we can send Satya into combat, tap Maze of Ith to untap him, and prevent any combat damage dealt to him this turn. His attack trigger triggers, we get 2 energy counters, and our general lives to see another combat. Satya approves, our opponents will not. 45 of the 64 non-land cards in this build have energy synergies, which is just over 70% of our spells. It may take another energy-themed set or two before the entire suite of spells in this build synergize with energy. However, until we reach that point, we have a sampling of non-energy specific cards that will help to synergize and strengthen our deck. Let's begin with some artifact ramp spells and predictably showcase Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Mind Stone. Soul Ring taps to add 2 colorless mana, Arcane Signet taps to add 1 mana of any color of Satya's color identity, while Mind Stone taps to add 1 colorless mana. We can also pay a generic mana, tap and sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. Continuing the artifact ramp section of our deck tech are Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Conviction, and Talisman of Progress. These artifacts tap to add a colorless mana, or they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana, and they deal 1 point of damage to us. For the purposes of mass removal, we have Farewell, Cyclonic Rift, Blasphemous Act, and Vandal Blast. Farewell has us choose 1 or more of the following options: exile all artifacts, exile all creatures, exile all enchantments, exile all graveyards. Overloading Cyclonic Rift results in returning all non-land permanents we don't control to their owner's hands. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. Note that this spell's mana value is reduced by 1 generic mana for each creature on the battlefield. Overloading Vandal Blast destroys each artifact we do not control. We have some protection in the 99 with Teferi's Protection and Swiftfoot Boots. Until our next turn, Teferi's Protection prohibits our life total from changing, we gain protection from everything, and all permanents we control phase out, which means they are treated as though they do not exist. For an equip cost of 1 generic mana, Swiftfoot Boots gives equipped creature hexproof and haste. Satya already has haste, but hexproof stops our opponents from targeting our general with any spells or abilities. There are a couple of tutor options included in the forms of Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor. These tutors have us respectively search our library for an artifact or enchantment card and an instant or sorcery card, reveal them, shuffle our library, and put those cards on top. We can strengthen our energy output with Strionic Resonator and Panharmonicon. We can pay 2 generic mana and tap Strionic Resonator to copy target triggered ability we control, and we may choose new targets for the copy. Satya's attack trigger is a prime target for Strionic Resonator. Panharmonicon's impact is even greater. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. Doubling our enter the battlefield energy producing triggers should yield very favorable results for us. Lastly, since combat is our preferred path to victory, we have some combat enhancing and potentially game ending powerhouses in the forms of Akroma's Will, Waves of Aggression, and Starlight Spectacular. Akroma's Will has us choose one of the following options, but if we control Satya as we cast this spell, we may choose both. Either creatures we control gain flying, vigilance, and double strike until end of turn, and or creatures we control gain lifelink, indestructible, and protection from each color until end of turn. Basically, with a big enough army of creatures and Satya under our control, casting Akroma's Will is good game. Waves of Aggression has us untap all creatures that attacked this turn, and at the conclusion of our second main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase. This sorcery also has the Retrace mechanic, which allows us to cast this card from our graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs. Note that Waves of Aggression untaps all creatures that attacked this turn, not just those that attacked during the most recent combat phase. Lastly, the criminally undervalued and repugnantly underplayed Starlight Spectacular has the Parade mechanic, which, at the beginning of combat on our turn, has us choose creatures we control one at a time until each creature we control has been chosen. Each of these creatures gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature chosen before it. Note that the first creature chosen gets +0/+0, the second creature chosen gets +1/+1, and so on and so forth. The power and toughness boosts provided by Starlight Spectacular should allow us to overwhelm our opponents. Now let's showcase the various energy-specific spells and abilities that inundate the 99 of this build, and we'll start with every player's favorite things to do in Magic: ramping and drawing cards. Conversion Apparatus taps to add a colorless mana. We can also pay 3 generic mana and tap it to get 3 energy counters. Or we can tap the apparatus and pay 3 energy counters to add 3 mana and any combination of colors to our mana pool. Solar Transformer enters the battlefield tapped, and when it comes into play, we get 3 energy counters. We can tap the Transformer to add a colorless mana, or we can tap it and pay an energy counter to add 1 mana of any color. These artifacts give us mana ramp, energy production, and mana fixing if needed. For the purposes of card draw, we have a one-and-done source with Era of Innovation. Whenever an artifact or artificer enters the battlefield under our control, we can pay 1 generic mana. If we do, then we get 2 energy counters. We can pay 6 energy counters and sacrifice this enchantment to draw 3 cards. In addition to various artifact token producing abilities, nearly 1/2 of the spells in this deck are artifact spells. Note that Era of Innovation is also triggered by Artificers, and we will soon showcase multiple Artificers that reside in the 99. Also, let's not forget that Satya himself is an Artificer, who will also trigger Era of Innovation. For repeatable sources of card draw, we have Izzet Generatorium and Royal Cartographer. If we would get 1 or more energy counters, the Generatorium has us gain that many plus 1 energy counter instead. We can tap this artifact to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability if we've paid or lost 4 or more energy counters this turn. This amount of energy may seem like a lot, but once we start accumulating vast reserves of it, we will be spending 4 or more energy counters each turn like nobody's business. Through her landfall ability, whenever a land comes into play under our control, Royal Cartographer gives us an energy counter. We can tap this Merfolk Rogue and pay 6 energy counters to draw 3 cards. Although this is not a dedicated landfall deck, we do have the potential to trigger Royal Cartographer multiple times in a turn. Sphinx of the Revelation is another form of repeatable card draw. It is a 4/5 with flying and lifelink for 3, a white, and a blue mana. Whenever we gain life, we get that many energy counters. We can pay a white and 2 blue mana, tap the Sphinx, and pay X energy counters to draw X cards. Although this deck is not a dedicated life gain deck, we do have options to gain life, and the simplest way to do so is to turn this evasive lifelinker sideways and send it into combat. Let's not overlook the card draw ability here, as we can convert energy counters into cards in hand. Liberty Prime Recharged follows suit and is a massive 8/8 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste for 2 in Jeskai colors. Whenever this robot attacks or blocks, we sacrifice it unless we pay 2 energy counters. We can pay 2 generic mana, tap Liberty Prime, and sacrifice an artifact to get 2 energy counters and draw a card. Versatility reigns supreme with this legendary artifact creature, as it is problematic in combat for our opponents and has an activated ability that gives us energy counters and card draw. Note that Liberty Prime has Vigilance, which means we can send it into combat and still be able to utilize its activated ability during the same turn. Closing out this section of our deck tech is Robo-Brain Warmind. It has a toughness of 5, and its power is equal to the number of cards in our hand. When this robot enters the battlefield, we get an amount of energy counters equal to the number of artifact creatures we control. Whenever Robo-Brain attacks, we may pay 3 energy counters, and if we do, then we draw a card. With a robust toughness of 5, we should be able to send Robo-Brain into combat comfortably for the purposes of utilizing its card draw ability. Let's not overlook the energy creating Enter the Battlefield trigger, as we have the potential to have a battlefield teeming with artifact creatures. We can also use our energy counters to create tokens. Whenever a creature we control attacks, Stone Idol Generator gives us an energy counter. Note the text here. It says, whenever a creature we control attacks. It does not say, whenever 1 or more creatures we control attacks. If we attack with 4 creatures, we get 4 energy counters. We love that ratio. We can also tap this artifact and pay 6 energy counters to create a 6/12 colorless construct artifact creature token with Trample, but we can only activate this ability as a sorcery, which is definitely a good thing for our opponents, because without that last line of text, Stone Idol Generator may have been the most powerful energy-centric card in Magic. If we would get 1 or more energy counters, Aether Refinery has us get twice that many energy counters instead. We can tap this artifact to get an energy counter, and then we may pay 1 or more energy counters. If we do, then we create an XX black Aetherborn creature token, where X is the amount of energy paid this way. Note that this card is missing the restrictive activate only as a sorcery line of text, which means that we can activate Aether Refinery's ability at instant speed. We do not need to tap Automated Assembly Line or Whirler Virtuoso to create creature tokens, and we can also activate these abilities at instant speed. We can pay 3 energy counters to respectively create a 3/3 colorless robot artifact creature token and a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. As additional boni, whenever 1 or more artifact creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, Automated Assembly Line gives us an energy counter. And when Whirler Virtuoso comes into play, we get 3 energy counters. As we will demonstrate later in this deck tech, these 2 cards are central cogs to potentially game-ending energy-centric combos. There are some creatures in the 99 of this build whose sole purpose is to create energy counters when they enter the battlefield. These creatures make excellent targets for Satya's token-producing attack trigger. Inspired Inventor, Riddlegate Gargoyle, and Electrostatic Pummeler give us 3 energy counters, while Aethertide Whale gives us 6 energy counters. As options, Inspired Inventor can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, or it creates a 1/1 colorless Servo artifact creature token. Guess which mode we will most likely choose. Whenever we attack, Riddlegate Gargoyle provides us the option of paying 2 energy counters. If we do, then target creature we control gains lifelink until end of turn. Note that this creature has flying, which could prove to be an annoying nuisance on the battlefield, but perhaps not impactful enough to warrant a removal spell from an opponent. We can pay 3 energy counters to have Electrostatic Pummeler get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. Let's not overlook this power and toughness boosting activated ability. With enough energy counters, this construct can become a surprisingly robust blocker, or a threat to one-shot an unsuspecting opponent. Lastly, we can pay 4 energy counters to return Aethertide Whale to our hand. Note that similar to the Purgle in Star Wars, this whale flies, and with a healthy 6/4 body and an instant speed return to hand ability, Aethertide Whale could cause a lot of combat headaches for our opponents. Luckily for us, there are a lot of removal and disruption spells with energy synergies. This provides us the benefits of managing the battlefield while augmenting our energy reserves. With that in mind, let's begin this section of the deck tech with some one-and-done energy-centric direct damage options. Harness Lightning has us choose target creature. We get 3 energy counters, then we may pay any amount of energy. Harness Lightning deals that much damage to that creature. Note that this instant spell allows us to pay any amount of energy. We could pay 0 energy and simply gain 3 energy counters, or we could pay enough energy to destroy an opponent's creature. We love those options. Galvanic Discharge follows suit, except it has us choose target creature or planeswalker, and it gives us 2 energy counters instead of 3. We can deal 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker by paying 1 and 1 red mana and casting Reiterating Bolt. This sorcery has Replicate, a mechanic which means that when we cast this spell, we copy it for each time we paid its Replicate cost, and we may choose new targets for the copies. The Replicate cost for Reiterating Bolt is 3 energy counters. So, with enough energy at our disposal, we could impact our opponent's sides of the battlefield by bolting their creatures. For repeatable sources of direct damage, we have Aether Torch Renegade and Blaster Hulk. When Aether Torch Renegade comes into play, we get 4 energy counters. We can tap this human rogue and pay 2 energy counters to have Aether Torch Renegade deal 1 damage to target creature, or we can tap it and pay 8 energy counters to have it deal 6 damage to target player or planeswalker. This creature has great versatility. It is an energy-producing target for Satya's token-creating attack trigger. It can rid the battlefield of problematic utility creatures, and it can finish off an opponent whose life total has drifted dangerously close to 0. As for Blaster Hulk, it costs 1 generic mana less to cast for each energy counter we have paid this turn, which means that this 8/8 pirate can cost as little as 2 red mana to cast. Whenever Blaster Hulk attacks, we get 2 energy counters, and then we may pay 8 energy counters. If we do, then Blaster Hulk deals 8 damage divided as we choose among up to 8 targets. In this build, paying 8 energy counters for Blaster Hulk's ability is easier than Sunday morning, and spreading around 8 points of direct damage is even easier. Dealing damage to creatures is nice, but outright destroying them is even better, and Behemoth of Vault Zero does this in spades. This 6/6 trampling robot gives us 4 energy counters when it enters the battlefield. When it dies, we may pay an amount of energy equal to target non-land permanent's mana value. If we do, then we destroy that permanent. This artifact creature is another wonderful target for Satya's token-producing attack trigger. In this dynamic, we get 4 energy counters, and we either keep a 6/6 trampler on our side of the battlefield, or we let it die and have the option of destroying an opponent's non-land permanent. Speaking of destroying permanents, the Motherlode Excavator can hit opponents where it hurts most, their precious lands. When it enters the battlefield, we choose target opponent, and then we get an amount of energy counters equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. Whenever the mother lode attacks, we may pay 4 energy counters. If we do, then we destroy target non-basic land defending player controls, and creatures that player controls without flying cannot block this turn. Although we are destroying lands, which is generally frowned upon in many playgroup circles, we are doing so for the purposes of allowing our creatures to attack that player for unblocked combat damage. At least that's how we reconcile committing this atrocious act. Use the mother lode with caution. No one likes the land destroyer at the EDH table, or anywhere else, to be honest. We have mass removal options as well with Aetherflux Ancient, Wrath of the Skies, and Localized Destruction. At the beginning of our upkeep, Aetherflux Ancient gives us 3 energy counters. Although we can only activate this ability as a sorcery, we can pay 8 energy counters to return all other creatures to their owner's hands, which leaves behind our 6/6 flying Leviathan and nothing on our opponent's sides of the battlefield to block it. Wrath of the Skies gives us X energy counters. We then may pay any amount of energy to destroy each artifact, creature, and enchantment with mana value less than or equal to the amount of energy counters we paid this way. This is our ultimate reset button if we are falling behind in the game. If this ultimate reset is not needed, then note that this sorcery has us pay any amount of energy, which means that we can pay just 0 energy counters, and we simply gain all of the energy counters created by Wrath of the Skies. Lastly, Localized Destruction gives us an energy counter, and then we may pay 1 or more energy counters. If we do, then each creature we control with power equal to the amount of energy paid this way gains indestructible until end of turn. We then destroy all creatures. We get to keep our preferred creature, or creatures, if they share the same power, while we wave goodbye to each creature on our opponent's sides of the battlefield. We also have a few spells that can disrupt our opponents. Electrosiphon counters target spell, and we get an amount of energy counters equal to that spell's mana value. Holding up the blue-blue-red mana for this counterspell is not difficult, especially when considering the benefits we reap by countering an opponent's high mana-costed spell. When Consulate Surveillance enters the battlefield, we get 4 energy counters. We can pay 2 energy counters to prevent all damage that will be dealt to us this turn by a source of our choice. With a deep reserve of energy, if this enchantment is left unchecked, then it will be inordinately difficult for our opponents to tick down our life total. Aetherstorm Rock is a 3/3 flyer for 2 and 2 white mana, and whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get an energy counter. Note the text here. It says when it or another creature enters the battlefield under our control. It does not say it or another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control. We have a small sub-theme of creature token production woven into this build, and each time one of them comes into play under our control, we are gifted with an energy counter. In addition to this energy-producing trigger, Aetherstorm Rock has a headache-producing attack trigger for our opponents to consider. Whenever it attacks, we may pay 2 energy counters. If we do, then we put a +1/+1 counter on Aetherstorm Rock, and we tap up to 1 target creature defending player controls. Let the combat games begin! Next up is Static Prison. When it enters the battlefield, we exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Static Prison leaves the battlefield. We also get 2 energy counters. At the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, we sacrifice Static Prison unless we pay 1 energy counter. With the amount of energy we can generate in this deck, we can keep the non-land permanent in exile for a very long time. Our last card of this section may be the most powerful card in our deck. Aether Revolt doubles as removal and as a win condition. This enchantment has the Revolt mechanic, so as long as a permanent we control left the battlefield this turn, if a source we control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, then it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. To make this source of direct damage acceleration even more powerful, whenever we get 1 or more energy counters, Aether Revolt deals that much damage to any target. The damage accelerating ability and the energy-specific direct damage dealing ability of this enchantment can be game-ending. Now let's showcase a smattering of energy-specific cards that synergize with and enhance our theme. Through its Metalcraft mechanic, we can tap Brotherhood Scribe to get an energy counter. Of course, since it is Metalcraft, we can only activate this ability if we control 3 or more artifacts, which should not be a problem in this deck. As a bonus, whenever we get 1 or more energy counters during our turn, creatures we control get +1/+1 until end of turn. This temporary power and toughness boosting ability should not be overlooked. Combat is our primary win condition, and with the frequency of energy production that we can accomplish with this deck, we can consider Brotherhood Scribe as a potential win condition. We have a couple of vehicles in this deck with Filigree Racer and Bespoke Battle Wagon. When Filigree Racer comes into play, we get 4 energy counters, and whenever it attacks, we may pay 2 energy counters. If we do, then target instant or sorcery card in our graveyard gains Jumpstart until end of turn, which means that we may cast it from our graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs. We then exile the card. This vehicle has Crew 1, which means that if we tap any number of creatures with a total power of at least 1, it becomes an artifact creature. A crew cost of 1 for a 5/5 with a spell-slinging recursive ability when it attacks is simply mind-boggling. Even though less than 1/5 of this deck is comprised of instant and sorcery cards at this time, this ability is too valuable to not include. Filigree Racer is also a great target for Satya as long as it is crewed ahead of time, of course. Bespoke Battle Wagon gives us 4 different activated abilities. We can tap it to get 2 energy counters. We can tap it and pay 2 energy counters to tap target creature. We can tap it and pay 3 energy counters to draw a card. Or we can pay 4 energy counters to have Bespoke Battle Wagon become an artifact creature until end of turn, which we could also do through its Crew 4 mechanic. This versatile artifact provides energy production, disruption, card draw, and battlefield presence. Since combat is our primary path to victory, let's include some energy-specific combat-enhancing options. When Scurry of Gremlins enters the battlefield, we get 2 1/1 red Gremlin creature tokens. Then we get an amount of energy equal to the number of creatures we control. So, minimally, we will get 2 energy counters when this enchantment comes into play if we do not control any other creatures. This card has another combat-friendly ability, as we can pay 4 energy counters to give creatures we control +1/+0 and haste until end of turn. With a sub-theme of creature token production woven into this build, providing these just-created creatures with haste puts a lot of pressure on our opponents. Whenever we get 1 or more energy counters, Fabrication Module has us put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. We can also pay 4 generic mana to get an energy counter. Our creatures are our path to victory, and with this artifact churning out +1/+1 counters like candy from a Pez dispenser, we should have little trouble sending our tall creatures into combat. Whenever Ether Geode Miner attacks, we get 2 energy counters. We can pay 2 energy counters to exile this Dwarf Scout, and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This blink ability will cause some combat headaches for our opponents, and as we will see later in this deck tech, it will also cause so much more. For some game-winning combat-enhancing options, we have Lightning Runner and Razorfield Ripper. Lightning Runner has Double Strike and Haste, and whenever it attacks, we get 2 energy counters, and then we may pay 8 energy counters. If we do, then we untap all creatures we control, and after this phase, there is an additional combat phase. With enough energy, we can utilize Lightning Runner's ability to win the game via additional combats. Whenever Razorfield Ripper or equipped creature attacks, we get an energy counter, and then it gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the amount of energy counters we have. So we cast this spell for 2 and 1 white mana. It is on our side of the battlefield as an artifact creature and equipment. When we reconfigure it, by paying 2 generic mana or 3 energy counters, it becomes attached to target creature we control, and while it is attached, it is not a creature. We also pay this reconfigure cost to unattach this from a creature, at which point it becomes a creature again. For some card advantage options, we have Decoction Module and Jolted Awake. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, Decoction Module gives us an energy counter. We can pay 4 generic mana and tap this artifact to return target creature we control to its owner's hand. Although 4 mana is a bit steep, this card does provide us self-bounce ability for the purposes of triggering the energy-producing enter the battlefield triggers of our creatures upon casting them again. For a little splash of recursion, Jolted Awake has us choose up to 1 target artifact or creature card in our graveyard. We get 2 energy counters, and then we may pay an amount of energy equal to that card's mana value. If we do, then we return it from our graveyard to the battlefield. As an additional option, we can pay 2 generic mana and cycle this card from our hand in order to draw a card. Note that we may pay an amount of energy equal to the targeted card's mana value, which means that we can choose not to pay any energy at all. We could simply pay the 1 white mana to cast the spell and add 2 energy counters to our energy reserves. For combat and card advantage options, we have Dr. Madison Lee. Full disclosure, Dr. Madison Lee was the original general for this energy-themed deck. However, after Satya debuted, we made the swap, refined the 99 a bit, and, well, here we are. No hard feelings, Doc. You are still more than serviceable in the 99. She has a litany of abilities, including a trigger that gives us an energy counter whenever we cast an artifact spell. We should be able to trigger this ability throughout the game. Remember, nearly half of the spells in this deck are artifacts or artifact creatures. In addition to this energy-producing ability, Maddie has 3 activated abilities as well. We can tap her and pay an energy counter to give target creature +1/+0, trample, and haste until end of turn. We can tap her and pay 3 energy to draw a card, or we can tap her and pay 5 energy to return target artifact card from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Unfortunately, we have to tap her for each of these 3 abilities, which means that we will most likely get 1 activation per round of turns. That's okay with us. Her abilities are powerful, and she is a doctor. We have a couple of potential artifact win condition in Gonti's Aetherheart and Aetherworks Marvel. Whenever Gonti's Aetherheart or another artifact enters the battlefield under our control, we get 2 energy counters. Note the text here. It says whenever it or another artifact enters the battlefield under our control. It does not say whenever it or another non-token artifact enters the battlefield under our control. We have ways of creating artifact tokens in this build, so we should be able to reap the benefits of this energy-producing trigger even more. If we are sure that we can win the game, then we can pay 8 energy counters and exile Gonti's Aetherheart to take an extra turn after this one. Note that we must exile Gonti's Aetherheart for this ability. So we must have the game in hand if we choose to willingly exile the powerful energy-producing ability of this legendary artifact. Whenever a permanent we control is put into a graveyard, Aetherworks Marvel gives us an energy counter. Note the text here. It says whenever a permanent we control is put into a graveyard. It does not say whenever a non-token permanent we control is put into a graveyard. Any permanent that hits our graveyard will trigger Aetherworks Marvel. As an additional bonus, we can tap this legendary artifact and pay 6 energy counters to look at the top 6 cards of our library. We may cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost. We put the rest of these cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. Note that the dreaded activate only as a sorcery line of text is absent from the text box of this card, which means that we can activate this ability at instant speed. Lastly in this section, we have Guide of Souls. Aside from our general, Guide of Souls may be the most powerful and important creature in this build. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life and we get an energy counter. Note the text here. It says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control. It does not say whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control. Our token creatures will trigger Guide of Souls life gain and energy producing trigger. Also note that this triggers for each creature that comes into play on our side of the battlefield. This ability is not restricted by the dreaded whenever one or more creatures enters the battlefield limitation. If 4 creatures come into play on our side of the battlefield, then we gain 4 life and get 4 energy counters. This ability alone makes Guide of Souls inordinately powerful in this type of build. However, we are not done yet. Whenever we attack, we may pay 3 energy counters. If we do, then we put 2 +1/+1 counters and a flying counter on target attacking creature. That creature becomes an angel in addition to its other types. Stapling these 2 abilities on a 1-mana costed creature in a combat build is why Guide of Souls is considered the most powerful creature in this deck. A turn 1 Guide of Souls could lead to a round of good games much sooner than usual. With the 99 of this build now revealed, let's showcase some energy-specific infinite combos that will surely make our opponents ooh and ah on their way to shuffling their decks to, hopefully, play another game of Magic with us. We begin by needing either Automated Assembly Line or Whirler Virtuoso. We can pay 3 energy counters to create an artifact creature token with each of these cards, either a tapped 3/3 robot or a 1/1 Thopter with flying. Note that we do not have to tap these cards to create these tokens, and also note that we can activate these abilities at instant speed, which means we can perform these combos during the end step of our last opponent in turn order. Next, we need Gonti's Aetherheart and at least one of either Decoction Module, Aetherstorm Rock, or Guide of Souls. Or we need all 3 of these cards if we do not have Gonti's Aetherheart in play. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under our control, Gonti's Aetherheart gives us 2 energy counters. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, Decoction Module, Aetherstorm Rock, and Guide of Souls give us an energy counter. So, we may pay 3 energy counters to activate the token-producing ability of either Automated Assembly or Whirler Virtuoso. Note that the creatures created by these cards are artifact creatures, which trigger the energy-producing abilities of Gonti's Aetherheart, Decoction Module, Aetherstorm Rock, and Guide of Souls. In our aforementioned scenario, when this artifact creature comes into play, it triggers Gonti's Aetherheart and one of these other energy-producing cards, or it triggers all 3 of them if we don't have Gonti's Aetherheart. We get a total of 3 energy counters, which we use to activate the token-producing ability of either Automated Assembly Line or Whirler Virtuoso again and again to create another artifact creature token, another artifact creature token, and then we rinse, we lather, and we repeat. Of course, the rinsing, lathering, and repeating of this combo is much easier if we have Izzet Generatorium, Panharmonicon, and or Aether Refinery on our side of the battlefield as well. If we would get 1 or more energy counters, we get that many, and Izzet Generatorium adds 1 energy counter, while Panharmonicon and Aether Refinery double our energy production. Any one of these cards paired with any 2 of Decoction Module, Aetherstorm Rock, and or Guide of Souls will allow us to perform this combo infinitely. If we have Gonti's Aetherheart, then we only need 1 of these cards for our combo to go infinite. Since we can perform this combo during the end step of our last opponent's turn, we can untap during our next turn and send a massive army of creature tokens into game-winning combat. Of course, these creature tokens could be enhanced if Fabrication Module was on our side of the battlefield as we were performing our combo. Or maybe we have Starlight Spectacular in play, and our opponents are about to witness the biggest parade in Magic the Gathering history. Or maybe we have Akroma's Will or Waves of Aggression in hand. We cast 1 or both of them. Or maybe we want to win the game during our last opponent's end step by having Aether Revolt on our side of the battlefield as we combo our way to slinging game-winning amounts of direct damage directly at our opponents. As for our last combo, we can also use Aether Geo Miner with many of the aforementioned energy-producing cards to generate infinite energy. That's right, infinite energy. Tony Stark's got nothing on MTG Burgeoning. We pay 2 energy counters to exile Ether Geode Miner, and then it returns to the battlefield under our control. When it does, it triggers Decoction Module, Ether Storm Rock, and Guide of Souls, giving us 3 energy counters. We use 2 of the 3 recently created energy counters to exile Ether Geode Miner again, netting us 1 energy counter from this combo. It returns to the battlefield again, triggering these energy-producing cards again, and giving us 3 energy counters again. Each time we perform this combo, we gain 1 energy counter. Of course, our energy production expands significantly if we have Izzet's Generatorium, Panharmonicon, and/or Ether Refinery on our side of the battlefield as well. Although exiling Ether Geode Miner repeatedly does not win us the game directly, creating an infinite reserve of energy counters should lead to victory soon after. Hopefully, our opponents will want to play Magic with us again soon after as well. This Satya build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a Satya EDH deck video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below on our YouTube page or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. An EDH deck video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this Satya deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.